It's a pleasure to be here today. I appreciate Mark putting this together. It's good to see some old friends here. It's also good to see some new friends here. Where some of you have heard some of this before. I've spent some time since about 1990, since the early 1990s in the former Soviet Union. I've spent time in Russia since 1997. Up until about 3 years ago, I was over there a couple of times a year. I did a Fulbright in 97. And primarily what I have looked at are the small, my term, grassroots media. And you know, as we go on, you'll see some of that. I'll try to kind of stay to the script here so I can stay on time. As an overview, the last time I was in Russia, I was in Petersburg 3 years ago, pretty close to the week. But I have not, in the last 3 or 4 years, I've been really involved in the journalism schools program with Fort Leavenworth Media in the military, and so I have not kept up with my media contacts over there like I had prior to about 2007, 2008. That said, most of my information today, any of the updating information that I get, comes from Vera Sovko, and I don't know if any of you know Vera. Vera is the press assistant for the U.S. consulate in St. Petersburg, and she's a very dear friend, trained PhD in physics, and she's been the press assistant at the consulate since about 1993, 1994. Someone who is able to not only in terms of is able to translate not only language but culturally and socially between American culture, American society, American expectations, and those of the Russians. So I just wanted you to know that's where the information, any quotes I give in here today are quotes from Vera. Now I'm not sure how you. Okay, here we go. Quick little bit of history. You know, where my baseline information comes from on grassroots Russian media is from those cities where I visited, and a number of them I've been to quite a few times. I've only been to Yikat and Chelyabinsk once. At the time, by the early 2000s, I found a small but vibrant advertising-based independent media. Sue is absolutely correct, and I think we all know everybody's beholden to somebody. There is no such thing as a truly unbiased, objective, independent, whatever you want to call it, media. Everybody, you know, if you're advertising based, obviously you're beholden to those advertisers. What I figured out after watching Russia for about 8-9 years is that to get close to the kind of journalism that covers for bias, tries to kind of, no, I don't like the word objective, but tries to get to controlling for bias, being upfront, trying to provide the most accurate information with the least amount of spin. You need lots and lots and lots and lots of little advertisers. As soon as you have one or two, you know, if you're owned by the government or owned by someone, you know, even a private individual, obviously that person or that organization is going to influence you. If you have one big advertiser, whatever that advertiser has influence over you. So going from that basic premise, what I found was this small, essentially small media companies strung out throughout northwest Russia and in Yikat and Chelyabinsk that were essentially profit motive. And I mean, that's its own issue, and that's not the point I'm trying to make here. But the bottom line is they are trying to appeal to a wide audience as opposed to the ideologues. At the time, you know, most had occasional rubs with local authorities, and they all told me it was mostly the tax police, you know, but it seemed like at that time, most of the oblast governors, city mayors, those kinds of people, had some kind of a truce, at least with the various media companies I talked with. If they were going to get in trouble, it was going to be with the tax police. So they had to be pretty scrupulous about keeping their books. Recently, Sue's talked about at the national level, using the journalists as a as a case study, the problems that the national media in Russia have had with freedom, with threats, and the like. Clearly, the national media are still confronting problems with confronting administrations. There are still problems with protecting journalists. As Vera said, and this is a quote from her, the state does not protect journalists properly, but then it does not protect us, the citizens, in the same way. Certainly, as Vera said, it is more dangerous to be a journalist than, say, to be a school teacher. Some of these are just plain root problems with Russia. Censorship of certain subjects is a reality, but it tends to be limited and generally self-imposed. American media, of course, we call this the chilling effect. And, it's not limited to Russia. There are certain things, if you work in, I worked in television for 15 years, there might be subjects that nobody directly tells you don't cover them, but you're quite aware of, what boards the general manager sits on or things like that. Most media in Russia are still not run as a business. As you're aware, they are run as publicity channels for individuals and or other political and small groups. As best as I can tell, the grassroots media are still there. Artem is here. Artem is a Russian journalist himself and would probably be better sitting up here than me. Feel free to jump in any time. The media that I dealt with are all in Russian and are Russian-based media, and the journalists that I dealt with all speak Russian and speak virtually no English. Therefore, it's difficult. Those of you who know me know I don't speak Russian and don't read Russian, so I have not been able to stay on top of it. As near as I can tell from indirect sources, the grassroots media is still there, and it is still struggling and still getting along. TV 100 is the big independent station in Petersburg. It was something of an experiment. I'm getting something in my throat. I hope it's not polonium poison.
I did touch your mouth, I swear.
And this is kind of a case study in where Russian media are. Vera's, and I've talked about this a little bit. I visited TV 100 probably 4 or 5 times over the years. It's owned by a local media baron named Oleg Rudnov, and he started the station 10, 11 years ago based on advertising, based on a profit motive. It was quite successful. At least one of my friends was hired there. One of my journalist friends was hired there and worked there. And, she had her rubs, like if you go to any of the Kansas City stations and talk to their reporters and photographers, they've all got rubs with where they work too. However, it seemed to be a fairly successful, locally based station. Focused a lot where the other large stations like Channel 5 were part of Moscow. This was not. About 3 or 4 years ago, they hired a journalist, a well-respected television journalist, named Andrei, I believe that's pronounced Radin, but I'm not 100% sure, to be the news director. And he took the station into, for lack of a better word, into politics and discussion programs. The kinds of things we would call public affairs, the kinds of things like the Sunday morning programs and those kinds of things. A few years ago, Rudnov then did away with advertising as an experiment. He wanted, he said at the time, to get out from underneath, the commercial aspects of it. And so for 6 months, he was going to run it, as Russians often say, on his own account. which of course immediately put the station under at least the perception of a more direct bias and control. Eventually, after 6 months, after a year, he kept it that way. And according to Vera, as of today, TV 100, does not rely on advertising anymore. They may have some advertising on the station. I don't know. I didn't ask. But apparently, Rudnov has had his personal influence over the programming, and as of a few months ago, Andrei Radin had left the channel as news director. Now, I don't know the story behind the story, but this seems to be kind of the way that a lot of Russian media go. Vera told me that most St. Petersburg newspapers are not profitable entities. In other words, a lot of them are still owned by individuals or factions in the government, and therefore they're run as publicity channels. The notable exception is one called Moy Rayon, and I think I did something on Moy Rayon for a group like this several years ago. I could talk more about it if you want. It's actually a hyper niche newspaper that is published in the 12 micro districts, and there is actually an edition of the paper aimed at each of the micro districts in St. Petersburg, and it's profitable, and there's a story behind that, but again, gives one possibly some hope. As Vera would say, financial inconsistency led to many of the provincial newspapers shutting down. Weak local economies, no advertising. That's, you know what we've been going through here for the last few years. One can only imagine what that's like in Russia. 10 years ago, I was cautiously optimistic about the rise of grassroots media and eventually percolating up into more regional and national media. I thought that as I was seeing a local economic base form in places like Volek, places like Novgorod, that as this grew, that media would grow as the business climate improved and as businesses themselves grew and need to get information out, hence advertising. Today I'm not so sure the smaller media will rise to become the larger media. As I understand the situation over there, it's kind of static right now. Some of these small independent media are managing to hold on, but there certainly is not any great pressure from the people to expand them and to develop more competitive media. My take, media issues mirror Russia generally, and this is where, I kind of look at this from an economic perspective. Until you get a middle class and a more well-developed business climate in Russia, you're probably not going to get businesses like the media. Wealth and power still controls businesses, including the media. There is little opportunity to attract independent capital, which makes even, the opportunity to bring in foreign capital, such as happened with a couple of Russian media with which I'm familiar. The lack of good laws protecting business and investment just plain play against that and play into the hands of the wealth and the power elites controlling the businesses. And so as long as that continues, you're going to have weak business and advertising bases. Wealth and power beget wealth and power. Stop me if you've ever heard that before. So my optimism is dropping. I do have, if you're interested, and you've got these on your back of your sheet, I can also I'll be happy to send this to you if you want to shoot me an email. But these are some of the St. Petersburg and provincial media links. Most media these days of any size have a web presence. That web presence is almost universally in Russian. Unless you're going to the St. Petersburg Times or the Moscow Times or one of the English language papers, you're going to have to deal with Russian. For the vast majority of you, that's fine. For me, it doesn't work so well. But anyway, I think my time is up. Nathan?